when you feel frustrated, irritated, or angry with your child. There's three parts to the video. One, why you feel those feelings. Two, how to shift those feelings for everyone's everyone's benefits too, perhaps. And third, what happens if you don't take that opportunity to look at yourself and you focus only on the behavior? What are some of the things that happen? Okay, so let's get right to it. So the common thought is we feel the feelings we feel because somebody else has done something. So I did a video about this several weeks back, and I talked about other people cannot make us feel certain ways. So our children cannot make us feel frustrated, nor can they make us feel happy. They can't do that. They do what they do, and then our emotions, our feelings about them are our responsibility. So again, the common thinking though is, oh, as the parents, we feel frustrated because our child is doing something frustrating. Not really the case. Now, let me clarify that yes, there are real truths for us if we are, hurrying to get out the door for an important appointment and our child is not putting on their shoes or something like that. Yes, that is going on, and that in and of itself produces a stress response for us. However, why we really feel angry, irritated, or frustrated with our child is because of what we're thinking. And I do a lot of videos around this because it's so transformational and it's so important because it will, knowing this and being able to use this information. So there's knowing it intellectually, and then there's doing it, acting from this understanding. So it's two pieces. Some people know it, but they have a hard time doing it. That's usually the first step. First, you don't know. First, you have no idea. Then you learn about what I'm going to share. And so then you start to develop an intellectual understanding. Oh, it makes sense. I get it. That's step two. Step three then is when you're able to become more masterful and effective at acting from that knowledge. So I call that the knowing doing gap. So a lot of parents I work with, when they first come to me, they know some things and they're having a hard time executing it and following through on what they know. So we're going to talk about a little of both of those. But let's get back to the thinking piece. Again, super transformational because most of us are under the illusion that what we see out in the world, let me rephrase that. We are under the illusion that what we think in our minds is what we see out in the world. So we look and we say, oh yeah, that's reality. That's what I'm thinking. No, reality is what's out there. The interpretation we have is what goes on in our minds. And often we act as if our interpretation is the reality. So same thing goes with what I'm talking about here. So when we feel frustrated, angry, or irritated with our children, it's because basically we have faulty thinking. So let me say more about that and give some examples. But basically the bottom line is that what we're believing about them, their behavior, life, ourselves, those beliefs, those thoughts are actually what leads to our emotions, our feelings. So let me give a few examples to hopefully make it more concrete, because I'm a concrete kind of person. So some common things that you may have experienced or other parents may have experienced. Let's talk about your child waking up at night. They're asleep and then they wake up and scream for you in the middle of the night or start crying, or they're in their room and you can hear them and you wake up, those things. So again, that can be stressful, right? You're in peaceful slumber and you get startled out of your sleep. Yes, there's a stressful part of that. But let's look at what actually causes then our feelings of irritation, frustration. So here's some thoughts that you might have when this night waking occurs. they'll never sleep through the night. My husband and I will never have energy or time for our relationship again. She should sleep better by now. My friends all have their children sleep through the night. There must be something wrong with my child because she's 8 and she should sleep through the night. Whatever, some iteration of those. So I think you can see when those are the thoughts you're thinking, that creates distress for you because it's like, oh, this should be happening. That's what your mind is telling you. But reality is you've got a child awake in the middle of the night. So it's not the reality. So that is where the stress comes in, when reality is one thing and what we tell ourselves is something else. So that's why for some people, when they have those kind of thoughts, it becomes more stressful and their emotions become more agitated about what's actually going on. Let me give another example. So let's say your child is refusing to go to school or to camp or somewhere where they're supposed to be going, right? Something that's set up and scheduled, things like that. So here might be some thoughts that you have in that situation. She has to go. I have to be at work. She should understand by now this is how life works. She loves school or camp or her friend's house, again, whatever it is. She loves it there. There's no good reason for her not to go. I can't let her manipulate me. So those and other thoughts can make it easy for you to start to feel agitated, okay? So those are a couple examples that, again, are common to a lot of families. So yes, there is the stress of the event. I'm not negating that. No way am I saying that. What I am saying is that our levels of discomfort, agitation, irritation, those are a direct result of us believing the thoughts that we're thinking. So you can see that some of the examples I gave of thoughts were about our child. She or he should be capable of something, or they should know better. So this is a demand about how they need to be. We have demands on ourselves. I have to go to work, or I have to get my child to learn how to sleep through the night. So we have demands on ourselves. We also have fears about ourselves. So when something happens, let's say, you think about when your child has a big emotional release, commonly called a tantrum, in public. For most parents, that is more unnerving. That might not be the right word. It's more frustrating, irritating, discombobulating than when it happens at home. Part of the reason that is for most parents is that we are unconsciously worrying about what are all those other people going to think about me or my child. Oh my gosh. Now, again, I'm not making light of it. It's what happens in our minds because of our own conditioning. But so we're then going internally without knowing it. Oh my gosh, how am I looking? I don't want people to think I'm a crappy parent or that my child is a psycho, my child is out of control, whatever our own iteration of those thoughts are. And so that in and of itself, again, then we're like, oh no, I've got to do something. So it's not so much the event, it's what we tell ourselves. Okay, so now that you understand more about the why, and it's not, let me clarify one thing too. No way is that meant to judge you. It's what our human mind does. Our mind makes up meaning. We have a meaning-making mind, so it sees something, it hears something, and automatically the story team, what I call the crazy monkeys up there, they get to work typing and say, oh, this is what it is. I know what it is. I know what it means. I know what it means about life. I know what it means about me. I know what it means about these other people. And that happens in nanoseconds. And because so much of our mind is focused on things below our conscious awareness, we run with those stories. Again, nobody's fact checking, nobody's looking at it and saying, is that really true? Let me verify, make sure that's really what's happening. So we usually just go, that's what we follow. So it's a human thing. It's what we do. It's not something you're doing wrong. It is something that once you know it, you can do things to practice so that you become more aware of when your thoughts are leading you astray. You get more aware of the fact that your thoughts are not reality. So you can be more self-reflective. You can have more of a pause and have some space in between when something happens and when you respond or react to it. So there is real value in becoming more aware of and more fluent in your mind's chatter, because it's going to really serve you to be able to change your behavior. So that's what I want to shift over to though now is, what do we do about it? How can we make it different? Because here's what I see is that when we're stressed out, when we're feeling frustrated, when we're irritated, when we're angry, one, that's not usually most people's favorite place to be. So if I said, hey, what emotion would you like to feel most of the time? I'm guessing very few of you would say frustrated, angry, irritated. It's just not our favorite place to be. So if you don't want to feel it, obviously you're human and you're going to feel it. And yet you do have control over what you get to feel and where you stay in your emotional state. So if you can learn more about your thoughts and how to work with them, you can help yourself out of that frustration more quickly. You can sometimes not even go into it. You can feel it start to rise, like, oh, that's coming up. And as you become more aware, then it's easier to still honor that emotion. It's not cutting it off. It's honoring it, and yet it's not getting stuck in it. It's not getting married to it in terms of, I have to go through this now. Most of us, if you think about children, one of the really great qualities of children is their fluidity with emotions. So now it's perplexing at times because, 2 minutes ago they were happy and now they're screaming. And so as adults, we're like, what's up? But nonetheless, the fluidity that they have with emotions really allows them to be more present with life. So yeah, when they're happy, they're like, well, I'm grooving, I'm happy. Then something happens and they feel sad. And then they're like, oh, I'm sad. And they cry, or they're angry and they get upset about it. And they move through that quickly, because that's what emotions actually do. They usually move through us in about 90 seconds. So children are really skilled at this until we manipulate them with our own socialization and they unlearn some things. So as adults, we are unlearning. We're unlearning what we do now habitually. And so that's this process. So here's what you can do if you want to experience less frustration, irritation, and anger with your children, and you want to have less of the negative effects that tend to happen when we're feeling irritated, angry, and frustrated. So number one thing you can do is start with your reaction. So when something is not going well in family life, most parents, their immediate focus is on, what can I do to get them to change? How can I stop that behavior? Now, again, nothing wrong with that. We can certainly work with our children. However, the best thing to do first is to focus on our reaction. What is it in us that we can shift? Because that's where we have the power. We have 100% power over ourselves. We have actually 0% power over our children. We have influence, but we have no power over them. That is a common misconception, that people think, oh yeah, I have power over others. You do not. We have power over no one but ourselves. So it's really important to focus on yourself. This is really a big part of what I do with the parents that I work with, because this is where what I talked about at the very beginning, in terms of the big transformations that we experience. It's when we get inside and get underneath long-standing habits, patterns of thinking, ways of undermining ourselves, ways of sabotaging our relationships that we're mostly not aware of that we do. So that's what you want to do, number one. And so you can do it yourself. You can work with a therapist. You can work with a coach. You can work with a support group or a buddy. You can read self-help books. Really, really important thing to do, though, is start to work on what's going on up here. What are your fears? What are you believing? What are some of the core beliefs that you have about yourself? And I can tell you, there are going to be some negative ones in there. Almost everybody I've ever met and talked to has core beliefs that include things like not being lovable, not being worthy, not being enough, being messed up or screwed up somehow, missing something essential that everybody else has. So they're there. Even if you love yourself, most of us have, I would say all of us, but I do my best not to make that big of a generalization. Most of us have these core beliefs that are lingering there, and they're just waiting to get activated by things in the world. So number one thing you can do to make the situation better for everyone is work on your own reactions. The second thing you can do is really identify what the problem is. Now, this is something I love to do with people too, because they'll say, well, the issue is my child not eating what I provide for dinner. Well, that's not really the issue. That is what's going on. That's what's happening in reality. But beneath that are one or more issues. So it might be the issue for that person is fears about their child not getting the right nourishment, fears about their child having poor health because they don't eat well, fears about never having freedom again as a parent because you're always making new things or doing things to keep your child happy when they don't like what you first prepare. So again, it can run the gamut, and there's lots of other things, but you want to take the time to identify what's really the problem. So that's what I usually ask people is I'll say, when they say, you know, here's what's going on. And so I'll say to them, well, tell me what's the problem with that? So that you can ask yourself that. What's the problem with this thing that my child is doing or not doing? What's the real problem? And keep digging and keep playing with it till you find what are the things that really that feel sticky and icky, that you're like, oh yeah, that's the thing. I hate having to repeat myself. And so I think that if my child doesn't listen the first time, they don't respect me, I don't have any power, I don't have any influence. That's what happens for a lot of moms, is they start to think those things. They don't know that's what they're thinking, but that's what they get irritated about. It's really less about their child not listening than it is about, oh my gosh, what does this mean about me, our relationship, our future, things like that. So after you identify the problem, the third thing you want to do is look for clues. This is a little bit more oriented to your child's behavior. So you want to look for clues as to why your child may be behaving the way she or he is. So this is, I encourage my clients to be more like detectives. So like, look, notice, pay attention. Are there patterns? Are there times of day? Are there certain situations or circumstances where your child does this behavior more often? So start to be really curious and be like, I wonder why. Because what usually happens for us is, again, cultural conditioning. We make immediate assumptions. My child does this because he's mad at his brother, or he's frustrated with the new baby. Well, yeah, maybe. However, that's not necessarily going to help a lot. It's going to give you some ideas, but you really want to get in there and look for, okay, what are the needs that my child has? And are their needs being fulfilled, or do they have some unmet needs? You want to look at what are the stresses going on for them. So we tend to forget as adults, like, for example, my daughter's at summer camp right now. And I look at it and I say, oh, fun. Look, she's playing with friends. They get to do activities. They get to swim, so on and so forth. And so I see it from my perception as an adult. I think, wow, cool. It's fun. She's with peers her age. She has a lot of freedom. It's blah, blah, whatever stories I make up, but I see it from my perception. What I may not realize if I'm not taking the time to look at how my child view it, I might be missing that for her, this is a new camp, and a new camp for her can be something that she feels anxious about. She doesn't know the adults. She doesn't know, in this case, she doesn't know the children, or she's getting to know them, but didn't know them when she first came in. She's learning about what are their guidelines for behavior, what's the routine and rhythm of their day. And we can say, oh, that's not stressful, that's whatever. But it is. It's new. It's something that her brain gets to process and has to work through. So even if it seems good, it's still a stress on her. So you want to look at what are some of the stresses in my child's life right now. You can look around relationships. You can look around, what's going on in the family. And again, they can be good things. They don't all have to be bad things. But you want to look for what things might feel stressful to your child. Maybe changes in routine, coming in and out of different seasons are changes. Starting school, having new relationships, having parents in a certain work setting, traveling more or traveling less. All those things are stressful. So look for needs that your child has, look for the stress that they might be feeling. You want to also look for maybe sources of misinformation that they have. So this is a little more on the learning side. So we tend to think that often that our children are more capable than they are. So like if they do something one day, we often then think, oh, great, they can tie their shoes now. It's tying shoes, we're done, we've learned that. No, it's usually not the case. Usually that's going to take them some time to master, lots of practice, sometimes where they don't do it well, sometimes where they don't feel comfortable doing it or competent doing it. So we want to look at that sense of, where are they at with something? Maybe we've talked to them before about how we want them to be when we have friends coming over. But just because we had that conversation once or twice or 5 times doesn't mean that they still might not need our support to be ready for that and have that kind of experience be successful and smooth flowing. So that's what I mean by misinformation. Like what are some things that they're still learning and they're really getting the hang of? And the final thing you want to look for, and this is usually not people's favorite, but it's what role models do they have? So I was talking to a mom recently and she was talking about her daughter's behavior being pretty aggressive. And one of the things in our dialogue that we talked about was that the mom had changed. It had been prior to this, but the mom had really changed her behavior from more forceful in terms of verbal and even sometimes physical. And so her daughter, and it's not saying it's not her fault, that's not it. It's saying her daughter was experiencing, and often as the direct recipient of, her mom's more harsh, rigid way of dealing with conflict. So at some level, it makes perfect sense that then the daughter would be, one of the things that she might do is express herself in a more forceful way. So you want to look at that too and say, what is the role model? What are we providing at home? What are they seeing in other relationships? What are they being exposed to that they may be unconsciously trying on and or having seen and said, oh, this is the way we do it. We grab something when we want it. So you want to look for those things as well. The fourth thing that you want to do is address those contributing factors, the things I just talked about, the needs, the stress, the misinformation, the role modeling. You want to address those more than even the behavior. So again, we tend to think, let me work directly with this behavior, grabbing things from somebody else or talking in a whiny voice rather than a powerful voice. Yes, you can do that. And yet, if you have these other contributing factors that are not being addressed, you really are still missing a big piece of what's going on here. You're getting more into a behaviorist model of, well, let me change this behavior, versus it has a source, it has an origin in certain things. And so if you look at the origin, you're going to be much more effective at shifting the behavior than if you just try and pull apart this behavior. If the origin is still there, if the needs still aren't met, then the behavior might change, it might not, but that need is still going to be unmet in this example, and you're going to end up needing to work with it somewhere else. So it might solve the one problem and you say, yay, and that's cool. However, you want to get down to those roots more fully. So there's one more thing you can do, and I did another video about this, and it is that you want to teach your child only in moments where you are fully calm and they are fully calm, and you're both up in your human brain, up in your prefrontal cortex. So you don't want to teach, oftentimes you don't want to teach in the moment, because if your teaching is not going to be very good. And if they're stressed, they're actually going to have a very difficult time for your teaching to sink into them. So you don't want to do it on those stressful times. You want to do it when you're fully calm, when they're fully calm, and often in, again, a more neutral moment. So it might be a few hours later after something happened. It might be reviewing something at bedtime. You remember when earlier today thus and such happened? Yeah, let's talk about that. It might be role playing with them, but you want to teach only when everybody's chill and relaxed, well fed, well resourced, so that you can have a more engaged conversation. Even with a young child, if it's not really a conversation per se, you still want to do it when everybody feels good, okay? So I'm going to pause for a minute and again, check in with Facebook and see if there are questions or comments. So give me a minute on that. So now I want to talk about, now that we've talked about why we feel frustrated, irritated, and angry with our children, and how we can start to shift our emotions and the way we respond to a more positive outcome for everybody, I want to talk about what happens if we really miss that opportunity and we get just sort of tunnel vision on focus on trying to change our child's behavior only. So here's what can happen, and here's what I see happen a lot. And you've experienced some of these, maybe all of them. So I want to go ahead and share them. So first of all, we often get into an adversarial relationship, because what happens is, again, we're sort of, what happens in our mind is we see the problem is out there, it's them, it's their behavior. And so now when the problem's out there, we're here, I'm going to turn it sideways, right? So now it's them over here and us over here, and we are in conflict over this behavior. So my experience, that never is the more effective, nor is it the easier or more fun way to approach problems. So it just, when we get focused only on the behavior, we tend to then create adversity where there doesn't need to be, besides the normal, like, yeah, I'm frustrated, but that creates more adversity. The other thing that happens is that the roots that are in us, when we only are focusing on our child's behavior, we're not tending to those roots. So think of them as a plant that you don't want in your garden, commonly referred to as a weed, right? So if they're the roots of a weed and we just ignore this plant, it's going to keep growing, and it might, put out a tendril and grow this way, and it pops up over here somewhere. We're like, where'd this weed come from? What came from over here where it started? So that's why we want to take that time to really get into what are the issues for us, because the more we root them out and get those core issues handled, the less there is for our child, or less there is in us for our child to trigger. Let me give a quick example that hopefully will be interesting. So last night, let me take a drink here. Last night, I was in bed with my daughter, and she made some comment. She said something to the effect of, why do you have such a squishy tummy? Now, what it reminded me of was on a Facebook group that I'm a member of, there had been, a month or two back, there had been a comment by a mom who was feeling really upset when her daughter talked about her having a big tummy. And through this person then sharing and responding to people's other posts and comments, what she revealed was, she's lost a lot of weight, and weight has been a struggle for her, and her esteem around her body has been a struggle for her. And so for her, she was triggered by her daughter's comments. For me, although I can get triggered by body stuff, certainly, I was like, yeah, I have sort of a, soft belly. I do. So it was like, it's not an issue. I don't think of it as rude. I don't think of it as inappropriate, what she said. I don't think of it as mean. I don't think of it as judging. She had her hand on my belly and was like, oh, it's a little, squishier than mine is. And so that's what I'm talking about. So if I had more issues around body image, self-love, or that those issues were more active for me at the moment, if I had been neglecting myself and my health and was feeling bad about my physical self, then it would have been more easy for me to feel irritated, been like, even if I didn't say anything to her, to be like, I don't have a fat belly. What do you know? Soft belly. What are you talking about? And just be mad at her for saying something that she noticed. Didn't mean it's true or not. That was her experience of my belly. So that's what I mean by getting to your issues. So if you don't work on your issues, they're going to be there to get triggered by life. And so that then you're going to be reacting to something in life rather than, as I was able to last night, it was like, yeah, I have a sort of soft belly. Yeah. And I went on to tell her, it was, here's what I noticed. I gained some weight with you. But it's just not what my belly is anymore. It was flatter at one point and harder. It's not now. It's okay. So that's one of the things that if you only focus on your child's behavior, not on the core issues within you, you're going to miss those opportunities to do your own self-healing and have your own growth that's available to you. The final thing that happens when we, again, get that tunnel vision and try and only change our child's or our spouse's or our neighbors or, the president of our country's behavior, whoever it is, or a senator's, whatever, then we end up doing things that really don't work well. So usually that comes out in our communication. It can come out in other ways too, but let me give some examples. So with our children, one of the things that happens to me too, but we end up shaming our children. So we're feeling irritated and frustrated, and that's because, again, we're having these thoughts of they should know better, or, oh my gosh, what's it mean about me? Or it means this about me, or it means this about life. And when we don't check those thoughts and really work with them so that they don't run us, then it's easy for us to inadvertently, and I have a video about this one as well, to inadvertently do things that communicate shame, that our child is wrong as they are. Not that they made a behavior or made a choice that we didn't like, but that fundamentally there is something wrong with who they are. And I know you don't want to do that to your children. You didn't like it when it was done to you, and I know you don't want to do that to your children. So if we don't work on our own stuff and we only focus on behavior, we often end up doing things that are shaming in our communication, which erodes our children's self-esteem, which has lots of very negative implications for their whole life. So we don't want to do that. So that's one important thing. Another thing that we tend to communicate is a sense of conditional love. So when we are, again, frustrated, often what comes out is harsher tones of voice, sometimes physical brusqueness or harshness. We have that impatient attitude. And so all those things get communicated in ways through our nonverbal communication, through our facial expression, our tone of voice, sometimes even specifically by what we say. And what I find with this is it can tend to exacerbate one of a couple reactions, if you will, in our children. Either, like I did, one of the things that they might do is they might become very much on the people-pleasing mode. So always sort of trying to keep everybody happy. I did a video about that and why that's not healthy. Lots of videos, as you can tell. So it can either lead them towards people-pleasing, which in my experience, often ends up having a lot of deleterious results for their sense of fulfillment in life and their fulfillment in relationships. I know you don't want that for them, right? So you can do that. The other thing, sort of the swing side of that, is when our love is conditional. Sometimes what our children do is they sort of swing the other way and to be more rebellious in their reaction and have this basically flipping us the bird saying, I don't really care about you. And so we tend to lose the trust in our relationship and the closeness and our ability to influence them. Because if they sense that we only love them when they are doing it right, then part of them can sometimes be like, well, screw that. I'm just not going to deal with it. Then I don't care. I'm going to do everything wrong, actually. So again, it's not saying that's our fault. It's saying it can exacerbate these things. Another thing that we end up communicating that doesn't work in our relationships is resentment. So again, it's like our child, rather than, yeah, we're human. We all behave in ways that sometimes don't work for the people around us. That's part of what happens. When we, as the adults, though, when we are communicating this, when we're stuck in our frustration and we're communicating the shaming or the conditional love, we also generally are feeling resentful of our children and being, again, we're adversarial. It's us versus them. If they would stop doing that, I would be happier. If they would get their act together, then I wouldn't be so stressed out. And so we breed resentment, which is toxic. I mean, it's like, I can't think of the worst chemical ever, but it's the worst chemical ever for relationships. It will erode the quality of your relationship. It will erode the relationship itself. And I know you don't want that with your children. You want to be close with them. You want to be connected. So resentment is going to breed if you get into this thing of they're making you frustrated, they're making you angry. It's over here and work on your part. The final thing that I see, and you hear this a lot when you talk with parents, is then the guilt and shame that we feel. Because what happens is when we are feeling frustrated, irritated, angry, usually we will poorly react at some point. We might yell, we might be physically rough with our child, some of the things I talked about. We might shame them, we might do all these things. And so what usually happens for many parents is at some point they notice, whether it's their child then cries in response to being shamed, or their child doesn't feel safe around them, sort of closes themselves off around a parent. At some point, we get some wake-up calls, and usually then what happens is we are devastated. We have intense feelings of guilt and shame, and so that's not working for us. It's like, again, do you want to feel a lot more guilt and shame? I don't know anybody who does. So you want to work on your own stuff so that you're not reacting as poorly as often. You're still going to react. You're human. I'm human. I do it. And yet, the more we do our own work and get off of this cultural habit of trying to change our children to do what we want them to do and be who we want them to be, yeah, we can work with them. Absolutely. We can work with them and teach them and help them understand how their choices have an impact on others. There's lots of really positive ways to do that, though, and one of the most important things, like I started off near the beginning of this video broadcast saying, is be aware of what's going on for us, what's getting triggered, what's the problem about the issue, so that we can get those things out of the way so that those aren't contaminating our communication when we do step forward to teach and to help our child understand the way we want to see things go. So that's for my conclusion. Let me check in again on Facebook and see if there are comments or questions. So that's the gist of it, is that when we feel frustrated, irritated, or angry with our children, there is a piece of our emotion that comes from the actual event. But it's like a tiny, tiny piece. Really, though, the source of our feelings is from the stories that we tell ourselves. And we want to, if we want to have connected relationships, we want to have strong relationships, we want to have durable and resilient relationships, and we want to have our own inner peace. And we don't want to pass on things like shame, conditional self-worth to our children. Then what we want to do is focus less on changing their behavior and more on looking at what is the problem with the behavior for us, so that we can solve it in a more appropriate way. And usually, here's the other really cool thing that I haven't said yet, is that what I notice with my clients and with myself as well is that when we take the time to look at those roots within us, oftentimes the behavior actually goes away. It's amazing. It either totally stops, it's like, oh, they don't even do that anymore. Or they may do it, and yet what we find is now there's no more trigger. So it's like, oh, it's not the behavior, it was in us all along. So there was nothing actually in them to fix. And so it's totally awesome when it happens, and it feels like a miracle. And I think it is the definition of a miracle when we do our work and we go, I can see that that wasn't really the issue. What the issue was right here. And then if there is still a behavior that's going on that for some reason still doesn't work with our family or the way we want to be in relationship with our child, then we're coming from a clear space and we can work with them to make changes without all those toxic add-ons that I talked about shame, conditional self-love, or conditional love, and all those things. So if you have comments or questions, either go back and watch the whole video if you've just joined, so check that out. Leave comments and questions below, and I'm glad to respond as long as they're in the spirit of constructive dialogue. I'm glad to do that. And if you want to find more of my videos, there's a few places you can look. You can look on my feed on Facebook, either personally Shawnee Lavender or Shawnee Lavender Coaching. You can also find me on Facebook in the Conscious Moms Circle. That's a worldwide community of mostly moms, but conscious parents who are attempting to grow themselves alongside their growing children. And you can find me on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel with lots of videos there as well. So I may put some links there. My name, once again, is Shawnee Lavender. I'm the Conscious Moms Coach, and it's really been my pleasure to be here with you today talking about this subject. Thanks so much. Have a great day.